Okay, here's part two of the video. I'm going to go through the rest of it now. Let me go to slideshow once again. So here we go. So what I'm also asking for is finding total nominal GDP for these 4 years and the growth rates. And then we're going to do it after this for real GDP as well. So same page as what we just went through, right? We just did this to find all the expenditures. But what we can do is just look at the total, right? So that we have that for 2021. And then we simply scroll down to get the figures for the other years, right? So there's total for 2020. That's at the bottom of all the 2020 numbers. There's 2019 and there's 2018. And then we can just calculate the growth rates. So it grew by 4%, a little tiny bit of growth. And then look at that. We can see that's the impact of COVID probably. And then it grew by a lot. But remember, this is nominal, so this includes the impact of prices. So it's probably a bounce back of the economy, but also inflation, as was happening in most countries. Now we're going to do the same thing for real GDP. So we go back to that main page of when we type GDP into the search bar at data.un.org, and we're going to click on a different one of these now. We're not going to click on by type of expenditure at current prices, but we're going to click on by type of expenditure at constant prices, because constant means the same thing as real. We're keeping the prices constant, right? That's what real means. And then again, it's essential to click the correct choice. We do the same thing. We scroll and pick our country and pick the 4 years, and then we apply filters and we get our country. And so now for this real, we're only looking at, I'm sorry, that should say 2018 to 2021. Sorry about that. We're just doing the total. So we've got that for 21. Then we scroll down and get the other 3 years. And then we calculate the growth rates. So pretty good real growth rate for the Congo, but from a very small base. Still positive slightly, but that's the impact of COVID, and then it bounces back. So we'll see that for a lot of countries. I put them both together here, which you're going to do in the template on when you're done. Now I've applied a little bit of interpretation here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through these. You can read this on your own. I'm also asking you to get the percent of GDP from agriculture and the percent of people living in urban versus rural areas. And this is just a simple Google search. So that's for the DR Congo, right? You can probably find it from other sources, but 19% of GDP from agriculture is quite high. Worldwide, the average is around 10%. For highly developed countries, it's tiny because they produce so much high-value stuff, right? But a high percent of GDP from agricultural output means much of the economy is driven by low-value stuff, which is a challenge. We're going to talk more about that later on in the term. And this is clear when we look at the percent of urban population. So this is for the Congo. I'm not asking you to do a trend line over time, but in 2022, urban is 47, so still more than half of people live in rural areas, which makes sense because so much of GDP and output is driven by agriculture. Another way of saying it is people must move to cities in order for economic development to be able to happen. We're going to talk more about that later on in the term. So it's 47% for the Congo. I'm also asking you to find the size of the informal economy. This is just a simple Google search as well. We're going to talk more about this. And again, this means activities that have market value but are not recorded, right? Activities that are paid in cash. It includes illegal stuff, but it's mostly people seeking honest work, agricultural work, street vendors, etc., right? If they were recorded, they would add to the GDP, mostly in consumption, and would add to the opportunity for the government to gain tax revenue. So a big informal economy is bad for economic development, right? Worldwide, it accounts for nearly a third of GDP. So informal economies are very big. So much higher in developing countries, as it says, right? So simple Google search for the USA and the Congo, not surprisingly, USA, small, but still not insignificant, but very large in the Congo, very, very large, right? So now here's the total view. So here's the template, right? This is what I'm asking you to find. So there's USA and Congo, and there's the Congo numbers that we found earlier that I showed you for. And there it is for the US, and I've gone through those in class, at least the nominal ones. There's the percent, the components and the percent for the nominal 2021, 52.8, right? And the components and percent that I went through. And there's the same thing for the US. I've talked about that in class. Excuse me, there is trade as a percent of GDP, 81%. And trade as a percent in US is actually very small because the domestic market is so large, $15 trillion. Over here, per capita GDP, one of the smallest in the world, sadly, for the Congo, one of the largest in the world for the United States. Agriculture, pretty big in the Congo, and of course, very small in the US not because we don't make much agriculture here, but because the value of other things is so big. People living in urban areas, much, much more in the United States, and the informal economy very large. So my quick observations from looking at all this for the US, huge economy, high consumption percent due to wealthy consumers, very high GDP per capita. Net exports are negative, but it's not a big percent, -4, -3, -4%. Low trade as a percent of GDP, which I talked about because the domestic market is so big. GDP declined, and you can see declined on a real and a nominal basis in 2020 because of COVID, but it bounced back. A very urban population. My observations for the Congo, small economy, we're talking billions, not trillions, and very small GDP per capita, one of the poorest countries in the world, sadly, 555. GDP declined in 2020 and then bounced back. Consumption very high, not because it's a wealthy country, but because it's a poor country. Very small government as a percent of GDP. Big percent of GDP from agriculture, 19%. Still lots of people living in rural areas. So that's it. I'll end this now.